All right, hello, and welcome back to the Broken Business Models podcast. We're your hosts, Ryan and James, and before we get into today's podcast, just a quick disclaimer: none of what we say in this podcast or any of our other materials should be taken as investment advice. James or I could have positions in any of the stocks that we may mention today, and we reserve the right to change those positions at any time. So always make sure you do your own work and consult with a professional before making any investment decision. With that being said, the topic of today's podcast is going to be the quantum computing company D-Wave. So as you may know, and as we've talked about on this podcast before, the quantum computing space in the stock market experienced a massive rally that is, in our opinion, as we've explained before, unexplainable from a fundamental perspective in the later part of last year. Since then, in like January, February, and early March of this year, the rally has paused, and some of these stocks have started drifting down a little bit, but they're all still up massively in the past 2 months on a percentage basis versus where they were just a few months ago. D-Wave in particular has experienced a massive rally in the past few days as well, and is actually at about its all-time highs, which is massively above where it was 6 months ago. So D-Wave in particular, just taking a look at their financials and some of their history, for a long time they've promoted the commercialization of their quantum computing technology. They've kind of always said that they're on a big breakthrough and that they are commercial today and things of that nature. However, their promises of quantum computing being on the verge of a big inflection in terms of commercialization have never been, we have never seen that be realized in their financials. So if you take a look on the bottom right here, we have their quarterly revenue up until their most recently reported Q4 results, which shows no sign of an inflection, and the level of their revenue, you could describe it as a pittance on the order of $2 to $3 million per quarter. And on the other hand, on the left side here, if you take a look at the red bars, which is their operating losses, they're, in the meantime, as they're generating very little revenue, they're burning huge amounts of money in operating losses. So then why is D-Wave stock in particular surging in the past few days? The reason is because they recently announced that they had achieved quantum supremacy on a useful real-world problem. So if you remember back in December, in the late part of last year, Google came out with a similar claim with their Willow quantum computing chip, where they claimed quantum supremacy. But as we explained in previous podcasts, that quantum supremacy was kind of on a very scientific, like experimental problem that had no real world use cases or any implications on any real world use case. So now D-Wave is claiming that they have achieved quantum supremacy on a useful real world problem, and that has been picked up by the media and by investors and sent the stock up over 100% in just a few days. So what is going on here? For that, I'll kick it over to you, James, to explain what is actually going on.
Just a quick reminder for anybody who doesn't already know that we also have a website called differentiatedanalytics.com, where we provide premium short selling research as well as other tools for investors. And so what we do is we identify what we believe to be our most compelling short selling opportunities, companies that we believe to be either fraudulent or overvalued. And then we write detailed short reports in a PDF format, which you can access if you become a paid member to Differentiated Analytics. Another benefit of membership is you get to join our private Discord server where we talk about stocks, and you can also recommend video ideas for both this channel and our main Wall Street Millennial channel. So if that at all sounds interesting to you, make sure to go to differentiatedanalytics.com. The link is in the description below.
Yes, so as Ryan just explained, the reason why D-Wave's stock has surged in the past few days is because on March 12th, they came out with this press release saying that they have, for the first time ever, demonstrated what they call quantum supremacy for a real-world useful application. So let's take a quick pause to watch an interview given by the CEO of D-Wave on Yahoo Finance, where he explains this supposed breakthrough with quantum supremacy.
Fact that just yesterday we announced that we had, for the first time ever in the industry of quantum, achieved quantum supremacy on an important, useful, real-world problem. In other words, we are able to solve a problem on our quantum computer that cannot be solved classically. That was of great interest to the Jülich Supercomputing Center and was really a significant driver of this system sale. That has also started to generate a fair amount of interest across a number of other research institutions and government labs who are interested in themselves perhaps owning a system and being able to do similar research on that system.
Yeah, what is that quantum supremacy breakthrough that you're talking about, the ability for your supercomputer to do something a computer simply cannot do? What does that do to the argument from NVIDIA's CEO that quantum computing is just too long-term? It's not a near-term enough solution for investors to really be buying.
Well, basically, it clearly points out that he was incorrect. And I've talked about this in the past. Different quantum computers will mature over different periods of time. At D-Wave, our quantum computers are mature today. They are commercial today in the sense that we have customers that are using the system today as part of their business operations. And now we have also announced that our quantum computers can solve important problems that cannot be solved classically, full stop. Now, there are other approaches to quantum computing that will take longer to mature. So, Jensen wasn't wrong with respect to some of those other approaches to quantum computing, but he was wrong when he lumped all quantum computing together, because D-Wave is very different from everybody else in the industry.
So this interview at Yahoo Finance was on March 13th, and he claimed that for the first time ever, D-Wave has achieved quantum supremacy on an important, useful, real-world problem. And if you notice, the interviewer asked the CEO, Mr. Alan Bance, point blank, so what actually is this quantum supremacy? What is the use case that your quantum computer can actually solve? And CEO Alan Bance gave a very long-winded word salad answer where he completely dodged the question and did not actually answer what was this, supposed real-world application that they had achieved. So that's very telling that he is not even able to explain what they actually did. And you also have to look at this in the context of D-Wave's previous public statements. So in a previous interview that CEO Alan Bance had given a couple of years ago, he claimed that D-Wave has been commercial since 2022. So since 2022, supposedly there were companies, customers who are using D-Wave's quantum computers for real-world applications. That's what the CEO himself said. And additionally, all the way back in 2020, before D-Wave even went public, they published a video on their YouTube channel where they were having all these customer testimonials with their supposed customers who were claiming that they had achieved all these great real-world results with D-Wave's quantum computers. So you have D-Wave has been claiming since 2020 that real customers are using their quantum computers in the real world. But now in March 2025, they're saying that for the first time ever, we have quantum supremacy for a real world problem. That begs the question, what were all those customers all the way back from 2020 doing? Another thing is, as recently as January of 2025, Alan Bance, the CEO of D-Wave, gave an interview on CNBC where he said, and I quote, "We have been able to solve problems on our quantum computer in the area of material simulation in minutes that would take well over 1 million years to solve on the fastest supercomputers." Now, if you listen to that, that sounds like quantum supremacy for a real-world application, in this case, materials simulation. But that was in January 2025. So in January 2025, they were already claiming that they were having quantum supremacy for real-world applications. And in fact, going all the way back to 2020, they claimed to have real customers that were actually using their quantum computer. But now in March of 2025, he's saying for the first time ever, we finally have quantum supremacy for a real world application. Well, so then what have you been doing for the past 5 years when you claimed to have had customers? So the entire timeline is, completely nonsensical and self-contradictory. So let's look into the specifics of what is this supposed quantum supremacy they had in March of 2025. So this is the press release that they released. Beyond classical, D-Wave is the first to demonstrate quantum supremacy on useful real-world problem. And there's a quote from I mispronounced his name earlier. His name is Alan Baratz. So CEO Alan Baratz, he said, "Our achievement shows, without question, that D-Wave's annealing quantum computers are now capable of solving useful problems beyond the reach of the world's most powerful supercomputers. We are thrilled that D-Wave customers can use this technology today to realize tangible value from annealing quantum computers." So what exactly is this real-world problem? Well, it was published in the academic magazine called Science. And what they did with the D-Wave quantum computer is they simulated continuous time quantum dynamics of the transverse field Ising model. So it's some very kind of arcane scientific stuff. So they were trying to simulate some sort of quantum thing, and they used D-Wave's quantum computer for it. And then at the conclusion of this article, it says, the impracticability of quantum simulation opens the door to quantum advantage in optimization and AI, addressing scientific questions that may otherwise remain unanswered and applications that may be classically impossible. So if you read the conclusion of the actual article, it's very non-committal. It's saying maybe, we did this, kind of arcane quantum simulation thing, and maybe it could be used for optimization and AI and other scientific questions. There's no actual use case that was done, no actual thing that was done that can actually be used in the real world. They did some crazy, weird quantum simulation, and maybe it can be useful. And another thing that's very important to note is if you look at the disclaimers in this Science article, so they had all these contributors. You can see here are the initials of all the people who worked on this paper. And under this part, competing interests, they disclose that the majority of the people, of the authors who worked on this article, were either recent employees or shareholders of D-Wave. So basically, you have this article on Science magazine claiming that D-Wave has accomplished this quantum advantage, but it's written by mostly recent D-Wave employees and shareholders of D-Wave who obviously have an incentive to push the stock price up, which indeed that's what this article did. After this article was released, the stock price doubled. But there was not really any real world problem being solved. It's this crazy arcane quantum simulation that they did. And this reminds me a lot of the Google's Willow quantum thing from late last year. Well, they have the qubit, the quantum computer is not actually solving any problem. They just have like a bunch of qubits that are rattling around with very complex quantum mechanical properties, and that is something that is very difficult to simulate on a classical computer. That's how they come up with this quantum supremacy. That's how they come up with the notion of quantum supremacy, because these complex quantum interaction of the qubits in the quantum computer cannot be simulated with the classical computer. Yet they are still not able to show any real world results that they can get with these quantum simulations. And it's very very telling. Going back to this interview that we just looked at, where this Alan Baratz was completely unable to answer the interviewer's question of what their quantum supremacy actually achieved. That's very, very telling as to like how real this actually is. So think about a real computing company, somebody like NVIDIA or Intel or Qualcomm or whatever. They come out with a new chip, a new product, and they present it and show the world about it. It's like, we made this new GPU or this new CPU. We'll show you what it can do. It can render this complex video game in 4K graphics. It can do this AI thing. We can put this chip in the smartphone and we can like show what characteristics it has, right? So like for a real computing company, they don't have to get bogged down in these arcane technical scientific debates. They just show what their computer can actually do. But in the case of D-Wave, their so-called computer cannot actually do anything. So they never show the results. Like in this interview, Alan Baratz, he never talks about the results of anything real that they've actually achieved in the real world. He just gives, these vague word salad answers. And then when they have these articles, they talk about, oh, we're simulating the continuous time quantum dynamics of the transverse field Ising model. So I guarantee you that 99% of shareholders of D-Wave, the average, retail investor who thinks, oh, D-Wave, quantum computing, that's cool, I'm gonna buy the stock. None of these people know what a transverse field Ising model is. And that's basically the same scam that these quantum companies have been running for the past 20 years. They make everything sound very complicated. They use all these fancy terminologies with like quantum mechanics and stuff. And then, naive investors like, wow, that sounds really cool. These guys must be really smart. So I'll give them money. But D-Wave has been around for more than 20 years, and they have still yet to actually achieve anything tangible in terms of real world results, at least anything that's significant. So that's how they just had to like release these, crazy scientific papers, which are written mostly by D-Wave shareholders and former employees, where they go into like these arcane details, but there's no actual tangible result at the end. This has been the story of quantum computing, the entire quantum computing industry since its inception. They have still never actually accomplished anything useful. And and obviously, as Ryan showed earlier, their revenue, they always talk about, we're on the verge of a big breakthrough. We have this revolutionary quantum computer, which is going to solve all these problems and create trillions of dollars of economic value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you look at their actual revenue, it's minuscule. I think in 2024, they made $8 million of revenue. And they make this revenue because, they convince some, various companies to like experiment a little bit with their quantum computer just to see what's what. But if there was real, tangible, real world use cases, they would be generating a lot more than $8 million a year, right? So it's the grandiose narrative of quantum computing meets the reality that nobody's really willing to pay a lot of money for it because it's so useless. So yeah, they can generate a little bit of revenue. They can convince some research institutions and companies to allocate, 0.1% of their R&D budget to just tinker around with a quantum computer, and they can generate a few $1 million of revenue. But there's no real world applications. And this is obvious in light of the D-Wave's minuscule revenue. And if you look back, it's very, very important, as I talked about earlier, look back at Alan Baratz in previous interviews and D-Wave's public pronouncements and statements over the years. It's like a broken record playing over and over again. They're saying, oh, we just had a huge breakthrough in quantum computing. Customers are using it. Real world applications. They've been saying that since 2020. And they always have claiming that they have a new breakthrough, and it never amounts to anything. It's like there's an old saying in Texas that if you fool me, you can't get fooled again. But that's exactly what D-Wave is doing. And unfortunately, there's like a lot of investors that are naive enough to believe the same trick over and over again. And that's how D-Wave is able to pump up its share price, despite not delivering any financial results. Now, potentially another reason why D-Wave, in addition to this claimed quantum supremacy thing, another reason potentially why D-Wave's stock has been increasing so much in the past few days is because when they released their fourth quarter earnings, the fourth quarter earnings were actually like a disaster. They only made like $2 or $3 million of revenue and lost tens of millions of dollars. So the actual results were the actual GAAP financial results were a disaster, as they always are. But they claimed, but they did disclose that in the fourth quarter of 2024, they recorded $18.3 million of bookings, which is a massive increase from any amount of bookings that they have achieved in the past. So bookings are basically a customer places an order for a product or service, but that product or service has not yet been delivered. So that's considered a booking. You cannot yet recognize that as revenue because you can only recognize the revenue once the product or service is actually delivered to the customer. But once the order is made, you can say, I had a booking, right, for this revenue I'll get in the future. So it is, it does sound good. They got $18 million of bookings in the fourth quarter, which is huge compared to the fact that in the entire year of 2024, they only generated like $8 million of revenue. So this $18 million booking that they got in the fourth quarter is indeed very big for them. So who exactly made this booking? Well, this booking was made by the Jülich I'm sure I'm mispronouncing this, but there's a research organization in Germany called Jülich, and it's funded by the German government. And they do various scientific research and whatever. And they placed an order to buy one of D-Wave's quantum computers for a very high price. Presumably that's the majority of this $18 million of bookings comes from this one order from Jülich. Now, Jülich is a government-funded organization funded by the German government that does various research, scientific research. This does not validate quantum supremacy or D-Wave's technology at all, because governments waste money on stupid stuff all the time. Case in point, in 2018, the US government allocated $1.2 billion to fund quantum research. And that's how a lot of companies like IonQ and others were able to kind of cash in on that government gravy train by getting all these government contracts for their quantum computers. But none of that research has ever resulted in anything of any practical usefulness. So it's just a waste of money that the government is, the governments in general are very good at wasting money. The US government, many governments, now the German government is wasting money on these quantum computers, but that doesn't mean that they are actually going to achieve anything. So finally, we've kind of gone through the recent developments about D-Wave, but I think it's important that we kind of take a step back and look at the broader picture of quantum computing in general. Now, the word quantum computer, that is, you're thinking that it's a computer. A computer actually computes something. But I argue, we've made videos talking about this on our main Wall Street Millennial channel as well, but I argue that the so-called quantum computers that the likes of D-Wave and IonQ and others claim to have, they're not computers at all, because they don't actually compute anything. They just have these qubits that are, these rattling around, interacting with each other at a quantum mechanical level. And you could maybe use that to simulate some like quantum phenomenon and like understand quantum mechanics better by looking how these qubits operate. But I do not consider that an actual computer. I consider that more of a simulation. And I will give you this is a bit of an abstract example, but I'll explain why I think this is relevant. So this picture I have right here is from, this is a tank simulator used by developed by the Swiss Army in the 1970s. So if you are, when the Army is training a tank, you're in the Army and you're going to be in a tank crew, you obviously have to train on how to use the tank. But operating a tank is very expensive. It needs to be maintained. It consumes a lot of fuel, et cetera, et cetera. So it's actually very difficult and expensive. It's very expensive to actually train in the real world with a real tank. So these days they use tank simulators. And the tank simulators is basically kind of like a video game that the tank crews will play the video game, and that will train them how to actually use a tank. Well, back in the 1970s, before video games were really a thing, the Swiss Army developed this, tabletop model where they had kind of fake trees, a fake road. It's a miniature model of a landscape. And then they have this kind of device here with a camera or a periscope, so that a tank crew member in training can use this periscope and pretend to be like actually driving a tank across this miniature model. So this is a simulation of actually driving a tank in the real world. Now, would you consider this a computer? I would not consider this a computer, because it's obviously not a computer. It's just some, little miniature fake trees and a fake road on a tabletop. And that is meant to simulate, a real world situation of actually driving a tank in the real world. Now, these quantum computers, I think that they are just basically simulators, which are conceptually similar to this, where you have, the theoretical use case of the quantum computer is basically you want to simulate quantum phenomenon and see how quantum phenomenon work. So you have these qubits that are interacting with each other, and you can analyze the quantum mechanical properties, which maybe you could use that as a simulation to understand how quantum things happen in the real world. But that's not an actual computer, because you do not have enough control over the qubits to actually perform any useful calculation. That is why, going back again to the fact that in their academic papers that they're writing, they're not actually talking about any real calculations that they're doing, because they're not actually doing any calculations. They're simulating stuff. They're just simulating quantum dynamics by using their qubits and their so-called quantum computers. But just simulating something, that is not actually a computer, because you're not actually calculating anything. So I think that's a very important point to understand, that until they can show an actual calculation that they do that has a real world impact, you can basically write off these quantum computers as complete BS. They are not even computers. They are just these quantum devices that maybe there is some application for scientists to study quantum mechanics by looking at these devices, but they're not actually computing anything. So I would not consider that to be a computer. So I think that about wraps it up for everything we had to talk about today. As always, if you have any opinions or thoughts about D-Wave or quantum computing in general, feel free to let us know in the comment section below, and we will see you all on next week's video.